Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today we are continuing our strike coverage, so we're not going to be talking about the TV or movie properties, but there's so much else Star Wars that's out there, and today we're talking about one of the newer books, Resistance Reborn. It's a really interesting book that kind of helps fill in some of the gaps between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Riki had read it, really liked it, suggested it to me. I read it. We got a lot to talk about. Whether or not you've read the book, I think there's going to be a lot here for you to enjoy, so just hold on for some commercial breaks that I hope are not from struck companies. Welcome back, I'm Matthew, your host. As I said, today we're going to be talking about one of the novels, Resistance Reborn, and I'm joined as frequently on the Star Wars Universe podcast by Riki Hayashi. Riki, introduce yourself, and let me ask you, what was it about this novel that kind of grabbed you and made you think this is one we should talk about?
It was a novel I read. Hello, konbanwa. Good evening, everyone, or whatever time. I'm Riki Hayashi. And I picked it up alongside Bloodline, which we talked about previously. I was at the library and I was just like, oh, another Star Wars book. So it was just kind of on a whim. Mm-hmm. But I was intrigued by the title because it's Resistance Reborn, and took a quick look, and it takes place directly after The Last Jedi, which is a movie that I believe we both adore.
Yes, very true.
And I had wanted, I think everyone wants the transition from The Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker to make more sense.
Yeah.
And in the same way that the Clone Wars cartoon fills in some of the gaps between movies 2 and 3 of the prequel, I think this book does a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important book. It's always interesting with books like this where I feel like I'm looking at them through two totally different lenses. One is, what's the quality of the book itself? Like, how much is it a page turner? How much does it have passages that keep making me want to kind of go back to it? And then the other part is, how much does it, kind of explore or tell me either new things about the universe or new things about the characters or new things about the plot? And I think for me, I put this in a similar category to Revenge of the Sith, which I think of as the best of the prequels. And what I mean by that is, I don't think it's the best novel I've ever read. I think it had some flaws. I think it had some very good parts. I think it had some not so great parts, and I wasn't in love with the way the story unfolded. But simply for what it did to take those characters at the end of The Last Jedi and help me much better. One of the things I think I didn't like so much about Rise of Skywalker is so much of it felt incongruous with the end of The Last Jedi. And this feels like, it's not like this makes everything in Rise of Skywalker make sense, or it's not that it makes me understand what they were trying to do with Rise of Skywalker. This feels very much like they realized they had these big plot holes and wanted to fill them in. But I think it does a good job of doing that. It answers one of the biggest questions I had. And it was also just really nice to spend some more time with these characters who, I hope we're going to get more of in the upcoming movies once the strike ends. But we certainly are not going to see for a while.
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing that this novel did was fix or continue, I don't know how to phrase it, the story of Poe Dameron that we got in The Last Jedi. And it, for me, what Poe did in that movie was inexcusable and quite frankly, made me dislike him as a character. And I did not feel like the resolution of that in the movie was satisfying. And so this book directly addresses that. But what I mean by his actions is he conducted a mutiny on the ship against Admiral Holdo, and that frankly cost the Resistance many lives because of that.
Definitely. And I'm glad you said that, because honestly, for me, I really appreciated that. We'll talk about it for sure. it actually answered for me a very different question, but also the one that was most important to me, which was, how did we go from the Resistance sends out a message to their allies when they're on Crate and no one responds, to the next movie where once again we ask for help and all of a sudden a lot of people respond. So I think there's a lot here to get into. Let me start by giving a brief plot summary of the book. I'm going to skip over a lot of the kind of adventure details because I don't think that's relevant as much, but I'll just say, like, there's a lot of adventure in it, a lot of, like, hijinks and rescues and fights and space battles and onboard battles that are really well written and interesting. I don't think summarizing them is really going to be helpful, but I'll kind of go over the plot. So we start quite literally on the Millennium Falcon as it is fleeing from Crate. And we have a couple of point of view characters, most especially Poe and Leia. And they're both really kind of wrestling with what has happened. Leia's really feeling the weight of having now lost Luke on top of having lost Han and losing Admiral Holdo, which, if you've read, you mentioned Bloodlines, which has really paid off well in this book. But also, if you've read Leia, Princess of Alderaan, that goes so much more into her friendship with Holdo. So we're dealing with all of that loss, and she's trying to figure out where to go, and she's reaching out to people, and she's getting some answers, some she's not. And they try a couple of things, and eventually they find some Twi'leks, who are basically, you go all the way back to the Clone Wars, and the Twi'leks are kind of like the Mandalorians in that they've always tried to be kind of on the outer edge of things. They don't want to be involved. But when, either the Separatists or the Empire and now the First Republic comes to their planet and they want to fight them, if the Rebellion or the Republic or the Resistance wants to join them in that fight, then they're on. And there's a Twi'lek leader who knows Leia, is willing to work with Leia, and he offers them some solace and a place to rest and to gather. Meanwhile, some of our others have been going out to the far stretches of the universe, the galaxy, trying to round up more help. They find some more help, including Wedge Antilles from the original movie. If you ever wondered how in the world he shows up at the end of Rise of Skywalker, this helps to explain it. Him and his now partner Nora were mentioned a lot in the, what are the books about the end of the Empire called?
Aftermath.
Aftermath, thank you. Another really interesting trilogy. A lot of characters from that show up. We all wind up on Ryloth, the Twi'lek homeworld, and they decide they have to go out on another series of missions to try and basically, like, help the Resistance get at what it needs. And they realize that the things that it most needs are Norse ships, and so Poe Dameron leads a group to go try and steal some ships. Another group is going to go and try and rescue some prisoners. And then lastly, there's apparently a list that is out there in the galaxy that is a list of all the people that the First Order has either already arrested or is planning to arrest or has suspicions about. And it's basically a list of people who are upset at the rebellion, upset at the First Order. Leia figures some of them are natural allies, so let's see if we can get this list. We go on various hijinks and adventures. Some of the plans go right, some of the plans go wrong. We spend a lot of time actually with a couple of officers who are in the First Order, giving us some very interesting perspectives there that we'll definitely talk about. And eventually it turns out that someone within the First Order is working as a spy, and his boss screws up, kind of catch him. There's all sorts of kind of struggles that this person goes through. Let me look up that person's name quickly. Or do you remember his name?
Which one? The bureaucrat?
The bureaucrat, yeah, the boss.
Bratt? Windsor Bratt, I believe.
Windsor Bratt, yeah. So Windsor Bratt is our main First Order point of view character. He's basically a bureaucrat. He kind of reminds me some of the characters we got in Andor in that he's portrayed. He's in the First Order, and he's some of the First Order power hungriness already. But you also see how much he's being kicked around by the people above him. He's not actually First Order. he worked for the Corellian Engineering Company, but he's kind of aligned with the First Order now that the First Order has come in. I think kind of like, I don't want to give away too much for Andor, but kind of like a character in Andor, you have some sympathy for him while also recognizing that he's involved in something terrible. And as the book goes on, you have less and less sympathy for him. But basically, there's a plot going on in his office that he's unable to see because of his kind of domineering and incompetence. But it turns out one of the people working in his office is partnering with his wife. They've gotten their hands on this list, and they're going to sell it. And it turns out that they are part of a group called the Collective, which is basically Space Anonymous, as far as I can tell. It's a group. I'm actually going to read a description of the group because it's just so perfect. This is Poe talking about the Collective. He knew the Collective and had occasion to deal with a criminal organization in his past. They were mostly encryption bankers, network slicers, and data pirates. Criminals with a cause, but criminals certainly. Of course, the Resistance wasn't exactly on the right side of the law these days. So, they're very much Space Anonymous, in terms of, hackers and activists who are, using data stuff, also for their own, perhaps a little bit more for their own benefit sometimes than Anonymous or some of those groups. But that same kind of energy. So, it turns out that group is trying to auction it. Poe and Finn try to get into the auction. Things go wrong. But of course, in the end, our heroes wind up all coming together. All the plot lines kind of collect. Brat dies a deserved death. The person in the First Order office who's trying to do the right thing gets rescued. And by the end of it, the Resistance has more ships, more leaders, more soldiers, and most importantly, more hope. Do you think I captured the main points pretty well? What did I miss?
Of the plot, I think you did a great job. I want to make sure before we go any further that we name and acknowledge the author, which is Rebecca Roanhouse.
Yep.
I think
this is her. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, oftentimes we talk about the writers of episodes of the TV shows, not all the times, but for novels especially, I think we need to make sure that we're acknowledging.
Definitely, yeah. And she's, this is her first Star Wars novel. She's also listed as, in her credits, the Star Wars show, Journey to Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker books revealed, plus Your Star Wars Day messages on the official Star Wars YouTube channel. That's 5 things together. So I think what that means is that she wrote some of the text that's involved in some YouTube videos about Star Wars. That's from the official Star Wars channel. I'm not sure. But as far as I can tell, this is her first Star Wars published novel.
Well, she's got quite a few novels and some Nebula and Hugo Awards. Not the main ones, I think, but
Nice. Yeah, it looks like she's done a good deal of things in other parts of science fiction, and this is her first time coming into Star Wars. So that's pretty awesome. Race to the Sun is another novel she's written, and then she's written a lot of things in other stuff. One last thing I just want to add about Rebecca Roanhouse, the author, she's Native American. She's Navajo. She's been very involved with the Navajo for some time, including as an attorney serving on the Navajo Supreme Court. And I believe this is the first time we've had a novel written by a Native American, or I think any Indigenous person. So that's definitely an awesome thing. So, where do you want to start with the story? Let's start with Poe, actually, because you brought that up. What is it about Poe's journey in this that you really appreciated?
So, one of the things I liked about his story in The Last Jedi was that I thought of it as, I've always called it the leader's journey, paralleling with, the hero's journey that is credited, for Luke Skywalker's original trilogy journey. And for me, Poe is kind of the protagonist of The Last Jedi. And he has to go through this struggle where he is trying to become a leader of the Resistance and goes through a significant failure. Actually, 2 failures. I mean, in the very beginning scene, he orders an attack of the bombers on the Dreadnought, which accomplishes his goal of destroying the Dreadnought. But as Leia criticizes, you cost us all of our bombers. We don't have any bombers left.
And she did give him a direct order not to do it.
Yes. So several times he is disobeying direct orders from Leia, from Admiral Holdo, and he's he's got this hotshot, pilot mentality, which in other stories, when it's the hero's journey, that works out for the hero, right? Mm-hmm. When they defy orders, like they do the right thing and they save the day. But here, very much so, it doesn't work. And right. I recently just watched the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, and Captain Kirk has a very similar leader's journey where, he goes against Spock, who is at the time the acting captain of the Enterprise, and has to go through this process of failing his first shot at becoming a leader and then reconciling with the people that he defied and right. having them acknowledge, okay, yes, I will defer to you now in this situation.
Yeah, I really appreciated that about Poe, and a lot of what we get in this book, and I think in some ways this is the kind of thing that, like, I agree with you, I would have rather seen a little bit more exploration of it on screen, but I do think that in a book you get far more because you can get the inner dialogue. And one thing I think that the book kind of really makes clear, which you could have had, I think you could infer this, but it really makes it very clear, is that he was aware that he had failed Leia, and that was part of why he winds up leading that mutiny. Not because he thinks this is going to get back on Leia's graces, but because he's torn up inside and he feels like he has to do something. The idea of just sitting still and not doing anything when he feels so much guilt already, it just put him in the situation where that's what he wound up doing. And he thinks this not as a way to kind of, because he wants to understand his own thinking, not to justify it. And I really appreciate what that then turns into of him really trying to reset himself to understand, like, where did I go wrong? How can I this time commit myself to the plan? And even to the point where I think kind of, at least this is what I got. I'm curious if you felt the same way. It's kind of that pendulum swing where he was a little bit too brash and too, I know everything what I should do last time. And this time he swings back a little bit, and part of what happens is that Leia has to convince him, like, no, you are still a leader. You can still be a leader. And we don't really have the luxury of you kind of just feeling guilty and not doing this work. You need to still step up.
Yeah, so despite me saying I like his journey in The Last Jedi, the ending of it was too snappy of a fix, right? When they're in the crystal cave and he's like, we're getting out of here through the back. And everyone kind of pauses and looks at Leia and she says, why are you looking at me? Like, follow his orders. And it's a cute moment and it's a nice acknowledgement and handoff. But what we get in this novel is a lot of the other surviving members of the Resistance going, why should we follow Poe? Like, he failed us in that moment, and he also has that internal dialogue. So I really like that because I think we need it, and we didn't get that in the movie. That acknowledgement that he screwed up.
Yeah, I really think so. And I'll just address, if you're listening to this podcast, I doubt you're on this side of things, but just to those who still stand by the kind of like, oh, Admiral Holdo should have told him or something like that, this book really makes clear that that's just not the case. And that Poe is coming to the understanding of, with all that Holdo had going on, the concerns about how were they figuring this all out, as well as Poe having shown himself to be completely unreliable and unwilling to listen, that Holdo keeping that from him did make sense. And so I really appreciated that them kind of, it didn't feel too on the nose, but it felt a little bit close, but it definitely felt like the book was very consciously trying to be like, no, we want to put this argument to bed. So let's talk about what I was kind of most happy about. And I'm curious how you felt about this. In Rise of Skywalker, when we kind of went from Leia saying, like, we asked for help and no one responded, and now all of a sudden it's Lando who goes out and all these people respond. How did you feel about that? Did that work for you?
In the movie, no.
Yeah.
It absolutely didn't work for me. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot. So I might have like a word dump here. But
please do.
Basically the problem, I think, is that the original trilogy set this expectation of narrative and of the balance of power in the galaxy between the Empire and the Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And then the postquels kind of repeat the formula, right? Like they've been, especially Force Awakens has been cited as a retread of A New Hope in a lot of ways. And so our expectations as we watch the postquel trilogy was it's the same as the prequels. And so like there should be this progression of the balance of power changing and favoring the rebellion/resistance. And admittedly, like the second movie in a trilogy is usually the moment where evil is more ascendant, right? But I think that's wrong here. Like in the original trilogy, that's definitely the case. Like Luke's been defeated by Darth Vader. The base at Hoth has been destroyed and they've been chased off. And Han Solo has been captured, right? Like evil is triumphant in The Empire Strikes Back, as the title suggests. In the postquel trilogy, evil triumphs in the first movie. Like, yeah, they blow up Starkiller Base, but the First Order destroyed Hosnian Prime, the capital of the New Republic.
They destroyed the New Republic?
Yeah. And so this is not a case of like the rebellion slowly gaining strength. The rebellion, the resistance is crushed. And it's actually like it's crushed even further into the ground in The Last Jedi. Like it is literally like the people on the Millennium Falcon at the end of that movie. And that's very different from in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke, is on the hospital ship and looks out. There's a fleet. There's a fleet. So there is still hope. Whereas the hope in The Last Jedi is like in one tiny ship. And it's a good line, like Leia's line at the end of the movie, like we have all we need right here. But it is quite a bleak situation. And that's why I think like stuff doesn't make sense to us and maybe other people of like, where's the rest of the galaxy, right?
Yeah.
And so, I had to really like reframe my thinking of these two trilogies in relation to each other. And hopefully like, by listening to this, like that helps other people to like think like, yeah, these aren't the same.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Especially because even in the prequel trilogy, like the war starts, and so we know that sort of the machinations are going forward, but the Republic looks like it's just gotten this huge army. So, and they win this battle on Geonosis. So even that trilogy also doesn't fit the same kind of narrative arc. I think for me, all that's very true, and I think that probably is something I hadn't thought of. I think the reason why it bothered me the most is that I thought it was one of the most brilliant parts of The Last Jedi. And because I think there is often this idea in movie making, especially when it's a movie about tyranny, oppression, whatever it is, that at the end of the day, if all the people just knew just how bad things were, someone said, look, we're going to be brave. No one else thinks we can stand up and fight, but we're going to stand up and fight. At the end of the day, there's always more of us than there are of them. Which I think actually is a quote in Rise of Skywalker. But certainly, it's that's the point of V for Vendetta. That's the point of most Union movies and The Strike. It's that all these individual people or planets or countries or cities that feel scared, and like if any one of them stands up against the fascism, the empire, whatever it is, that they're going to get crushed. But if they all stand up together, they're going to win. And that if someone just says that properly, there's never a way to stop the signal in the Firefly movies, Serenity, whatever it is. If we can just show people the truth and inspire them, they'll rise up. And in The Last Jedi, that doesn't work. And I thought that was so brilliant, especially because, and again, I don't want to get too much into real world politics and stuff, but real world politics have been a part of this movies all the way back to 1977. George Lucas said very clearly that he was inspired by what America was doing in Vietnam and the battles against empires and all that kind of stuff. And it was very meant to be commentary. At the time Last Jedi came out, a lot of us had been every couple of weeks, some new story would come out about someone on the right wing. And we think, okay, this will finally show people that the Emperor has no clothes. This will finally get people to rise up. And it never worked. And to me, I think there was a real moment a lot of people were going through of like, we have to stop waiting for that gotcha moment. We have to stop thinking this one piece of new news will change everything. We need to organize on a totally different level. And to me, that's what The Last Jedi was about, was saying we can't just do that same thing again. And so when that's basically they did in Rise of Skywalker, but this time it worked, I found it very disappointing.
I think that's very prescient in that I believe the story of Star Wars that they are starting to tell more and more about the Empire and now also the First Order is that these are evils that people are willing to accept.
Yeah.
To a large degree. And so I think it makes more sense now in The Rise of Skywalker that Palpatine is the evil that people are not willing to accept, right? With this, Star Destroyer with Death Star lasers. So it's a little paradoxical in that the First Order uses Starkiller Base in The Force Awakens, and so in theory, like, people shouldn't be willing to accept that, but they end up doing so. We have to accept that happened. But I do think, like, what the galaxy looks like in The Last Jedi leading into this book is that the First Order has taken over.
Yeah, and they've won.
And people are kind of like, okay. And that's again, like, a part of this trilogy that didn't track as well when compared to the original trilogy and make as much sense. And that's like the thing we have to reconcile with and come to realize.
For sure. And I think that getting back to the book, to me, this book does a lot to help answer that.
Yeah. The Corellia scenes, especially. Yeah.
Because we see a lot of people who are like, well, the war's over. We lost. On Corellia, the bureaucrat who I talked about, he doesn't seem like he loves the First Order, but he's like, well, they won. And a lot of the other people we meet in Corellia are just sort of like, I think he does come to love them, but at first, he starts from a place of like, oh, okay, they're the new power in town. But everyone else, they're just like, well, this sucks, but what are we going to do? Even some of the Resistance pilots, some of the people who Poe finds to try and recruit, and some of the others find, their first response is, there's nothing to fight for anymore. The war ends.
Even Wedge.
Yeah.
Wedge and Nora have like a farm. And they initially, they're like, this isn't our fight anymore.
Yeah, and they specifically say the fight's over.
Yeah.
And I feel like this book, by showing that, we see some of the people who Leia did actually ask for help. And what we see is they have to be convinced, and that these small victories of getting more people involved helps move that needle, that Leia talking to them individually, having these conversations with them moves the needle. We learned that some of them just weren't there to answer because they were taken prisoner, which I felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out, but because if it had just been that, I would have felt that kind of underwrote The Last Jedi, but it's not that. There legitimately are many people who heard Leia's call for help and just, in their mind, the war was over. They saw no reason to respond. They couldn't bring themselves to. And like you said, they figured that this is what they had to accept. And it's, I think you're right. Palpatine probably is a part of it. And the Star Destroyers, they're all Death Stars, probably is a part of it. But I think what the book really shows is Leia making the personal connections. It's Poe, it's all of them sitting down with people and not just saying, hey, we need help, but really listening to their concerns, speaking to their concerns. Can you tell them a community organizer? Because this is like Saul Alinsky Community Organizing 101, but it's really what the book shows.
I want to go back real quick and disagree with you about the Corellian bureaucrat, Brat. I mean, his name is Brat.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think he's just an evil, opportunistic bully. And when he sees the way that the First Order is, that it is an organization of bullies that rewards bullies, he's like, this is perfect for me. I'm going to rise up. So I I don't think he's ambivalent. I think maybe he's unsure, but as soon as he sees what the First Order is about, he is, in my opinion, fully on board.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think he was probably a bad example of that theme, but the theme's shown many other people for sure. Shall we talk about our dear Mr. Brett and the rest of the folks on Corellia?
I mean, he's a terrible character. He's a well-written character, but he's terrible. There's I don't know that there's anything redeeming about him.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. I think he's a good example of how you can have sympathy for someone without thinking that anything they do is justified. Because I think the way he's very much caught in a trap of his own ambitions. And I think part of what it really shows is how much, he's a small bully, and he's trying to make his way in an organization of much bigger bullies. And he winds up really, it's not as on the nose as I'm about to say it, because it comes through over 100 pages instead of just 2 lines. But early in the book, or about the middle of the book, someone's trying to warn him of the thing that's happening in his office, and he just shuts her down and he won't listen to her. And then later, this guy who's a much higher up person, Colonel Gentile, he's trying to explain something to Gentile, and Gentile just shuts him down in the exact same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a classic case of hoisted by his own petards.
Yeah, it turns out the Leopards Eating Faces party is going to eat his face.
Yeah.
And we get to see his dawning realization of the leopards are eating his face. And like I said, I find some parts of him, especially earlier in the book, mildly sympathetic. He crosses some lines later that's okay, we're done with him. But I just think he was, again, not justified, not redeeming, but he humanized the First Order in a way that I really enjoyed, because I think, as you said, it shows how, a lot of people, when a new bully comes to town, they're not necessarily going to say, "Oh, I've got to fight this." They're going to say, how do I get on their side? And to me, that it's kind of the flip side of everything we're saying about Leia calling for help. He's the other side of why a lot of people would be okay with this, because in their mind, this gives them a chance to advance.
Yeah, I mean, his character just had big Hannah Arendt banality of evil energy going on.
Very much so.
Right?
Very much so.
He's a bureaucrat. All he does is push papers and move people around. And then when the First Order shows up and they're we're moving prisoners around, he's okay, I'm good at this. I can do this.
Yeah, very much so.
And I don't believe his character had ever had any moments where he questioned it, or he just assumed oh, well, if the First Order, they're prisoners, they must have done something bad, and he just falls right in line.
Yep, very much so. Very much so. And in terms of the other people in his office, I think they're more kind of part of the adventure part of the story, but one of them is 15, and I think was very clearly recruited to be in his office because of she has an eidetic memory. And so it's just another side of, Finn talks a little bit more about being recruited as a child, not even having a name for most of his life.
Yeah.
And I think this is it's another sign of, not only in the Empire, but also in the bureaucracy and all that, the First Order is very happy, because she's someone who's placed once the First Order kind of helps to take over Corellia, and thus the Corellia Engineering Company. And so I don't think the engineering company would have hired her necessarily, but the First Order is oh, you're a 15-year-old, but you have a skill we can use. Yeah, we're going to make you go do this work.
Yeah. So you mentioned Finn.
Yes.
And for all of you people out there who wanted more of Finn and Rose, I think we get a little bit of that. If you want more of Finn and Poe, we get a little bit of that.
We get a lot more of that.
Ship that. There's a delightful scene where I believe it's like a Canto Bight Part 2, right? They're going to this fancy auction for the knock list. I'm calling it the knock list because Mission Impossible's on my mind.
Yeah.
And Finn, having grown up as a stormtrooper, is I don't know how to tie a tie, when we dress up. And Poe is like tying it for him and like talking about his father. Like, my dad taught me how to tie like this, and they're like having a moment.
Yep. It's very sweet. I definitely had a like, okay, this just launched a bunch more fanfics right off this scene.
Yeah.
One thing I will say also, just backing up a second about Finn and Rose, there's no real explanation given, but at one, like, Poe is asking him about his dating life, and apparently, like, Finn and Rose were together for a little while, and then it ended, and then him and someone new were together, and it ended, and it's not talked about much, but I think the implication is, like, Finn is still figuring out his life, and yeah, kind of, you know, getting into he's not in the best place for a relationship probably right now, and he's pretty bad at relationships, and Poe teases him about that a little bit, and it was not much, it was maybe one page, but I really appreciated that they acknowledged, again, because you wake up in the third movie, and Finn is now getting to flirt with the woman who's another former stormtrooper, and you're sort of like, what happened to him and Rose? And so this was, again, it was a little like, okay, let's kind of try to paper over that plot hole and get us there. And I'm sorry that it was needed, and I think part of why I didn't enjoy this book as much as I wanted to is it did felt the book was like, the book knew what its mission was to fill in all of these plot holes.
It's a patch.
And I think kind of like, you know, Age of Ultron 2, Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, it's hard to make a movie when you have all those other agendas. Same with the book. But I do think, like, I'm very glad it was there. So yeah, I just glad that it did that. Finn and Poe get to have these great adventures together. We also get some more great moments with Finn and Rey, and I also really appreciated that Poe and Rey, you know, it felt funny to realize, like, they hadn't met until the end of The Last Jedi, and we get some wonderful scenes of, like, both Rey and Poe talking about how, like, well, if Finn trusts you, I trust you, and if Finn likes you, I like you, and my polyamorous heart just wants the triad of them, and so I was happy about that. But even if they're just best buds, for anybody who felt like they wanted more than energy, it's really nice to see those bonds connecting.
Yeah, I can't remember now. What was Rey doing in this novel? I thought she kind of disappeared.
She didn't do very much. I think she decided to stay by Leia because she was worried. She had a bad feeling about something, and then her kind of precognition, Jedi, you know, spidey sense, let her know that an attack was coming.
Yes.
I have the feeling that they made a conscious choice to mostly keep her off the board because
she's too powerful.
You know, she's so powerful. It's hard to, like, give other people space if she's along for the ride. I think they want to go in so many more directions with her character still in the upcoming movies. I don't know if they knew that when this book was published, but I can imagine her being a character they want to be very, very careful with. And while I want more Rey content, I will say I don't think having Rey more in this book would have helped. And we do she doesn't do much, but she interacts a lot. And her and Leia have some really good conversations about Luke, which feels really satisfying. They get to kind of process their grief together. And she gets, as I said, the really good moments with Poe and with Finn. So I felt like she's not in the adventure scenes, but she does feel like she's a big part of the book.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I remember now, like, the conversations about Luke, like, that was another thing that I just needed just that little bit more of. Like, they have that moment on the Millennium Falcon at the end, like, Luke is gone, and they hold hands or something. But yeah, I needed a deeper conversation, and we got that in this novel. So that was good.
Well, especially because one thing I hadn't realized was when Rey does what she does at the end of Last Jedi, she doesn't know that Luke is dead yet. She has no idea what happened on the other side of those rocks. She's just landed and is now here to help. And maybe she saw it out of the Millennium Falcon, but we don't know. But certainly, she starts out this book feeling very like the weight of I am the Last Jedi. All of this is on me. I have to do so much. And I think a lot of what we also see is Leia helping her to find that confidence that she had some of in Last Jedi, to be sure, but I think especially with Luke gone, she really doubts a lot. And so she has kind of like a real journey in this book.
Yeah. So I definitely want to address the fact that there are a lot of characters in this novel that have been like woven in throughout the history of Star Wars. You mentioned Wedge and Nora Wexley, right? Yep. Like they were in the Aftermath novel. That's where they meet. I haven't finished that series, but I guess they fall in love and get married. Spoilers.
I will say also Snap, her who originally goes by another name, which I can't remember, but he's now known as Snap. Her son is also in this.
Snap Wexley. Okay, so he's in the movies. He's played by Greg Grunberg, who is like a good friend of J.J. Abrams, I guess, because he's in everything. But he was in Heroes. He was the cop character.
Okay.
Among other things, like he's been on a lot of stuff. He's a great like character actor. And so, yeah, like I never made that connection that his character in the movies is Snap until I was like researching for this. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Wait a minute.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Like, so there's that connection. And Yendor, the Ryloth, the person on Ryloth who helps them set up the base, he is in a lot of stuff. He was in Bloodline. He was the Ryloth emissary who at the beginning comes and pleads to the Republic Senate about the smugglers or whatever, pirates who were threatening Ryloth. And that's when Leia goes off on the investigation. And then Yendor is also in Lost Stars, which I finished reading a couple weeks ago.
Very good book.
If you want to talk about that.
I would love to talk
Star
about
Wars plus rom-com, like I'm here for it. I was very excited when I found out like what the main plot was for that book. But Yendor is so Thane Kyrell is the male character in that novel who joins the rebellion, and at the Battle of Hoth, Yendor is Thane's gunner in his snowspeeder. Among other things. That's awesome. I think they go on together to in what do they call it? Corona Squadron. So they're squad mates in that squadron.
And I'll also say, early in the book, sort of one of the people who Leia, one of the things she says is, and this isn't quite a slight at Poe, but it's more because she really feels the loss of Holdo and Akbar and all those others. She says they need leaders, they need strategists, they need generals. And so one of the people who comes back to them, I forget his name. If you have it, let me know. But he's the person on Hoth who was the kind of leader of the ground forces.
General Rykeen?
General Rykeen, yes, thank you. He's the one who kind of is warning Leia that we can't, hold them off for long. We'll have to start the evacuation.
Yeah.
He's one of the generals who... And, when I read it in the book, I had to go Google it because I had no idea who it was. But I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's... It shows how much they're really trying to make this all a tied-in universe, which I really, really appreciate.
And the other one, we haven't said his name up till now, and I kind of spoiled it. I hope that wasn't too bad. But Ransom Casterfo.
Yep. Casterfo. Who is not in any of the movies, but if you've read Bloodlines, or even listened to our episode about Bloodlines... He's the senator on the other side who winds up working with Leia and then revealing to everyone that Leia is Vader's daughter. And in the end, he gets framed and is sent off to his death. And it turns out that he was never actually killed. He's been imprisoned all this time. And it's very important for Leia to kind of rescue him. And I felt bittersweet about that because I loved that he's back. But then why wasn't he in the movie? And of course, that's a problem when you're writing a novel that's a prequel to a movie that already exists.
Well, yeah. I think I mentioned in the last podcast that he was like penciled in as a potential character early on.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And for whatever reason, it just didn't work out.
Yeah. Okay. That makes some sense. But yeah, so it's fun to see them back and to see how all that works. And it's a nice...
I got emotional again. I don't know. Something about him, Ransom, and Leia and their character arc in Bloodline really got to me. And the reunion in this book was just perfect for me. I really needed that.
Yeah, I think so. It was such a nice way of tying back into those earlier novels and giving Leia's character some real continuity. I think we think of her so much in terms of her relationships with Han and Luke and Chewie and the droids and then the later characters. And we forget that, she was a senator in both the Empire and the New Republic. And she had colleagues from that she had grown up in the service of what was the Republic. And then, she grew up in kind of the being trained to be in the Imperial service. She grew up kind of, in the senatorial training programs, and that's how she met Holdo and had this relationship with her. And yeah, it's really just nice to see all this other side of Leia outside of her connections to Luke and Han.
Yeah. So for me, the Disneyfication of Star Wars, right? Like, I'm here for it because the way that they layer and connect things seems much more consistent than it was in Legends. Legends, like, at times got really random, and it just felt like there was no one in charge who knew everything and could, like, point to a novel or a comic book and say, like, this character here, this character there. I feel like there's better continuity now in the Disney canon. And I think it's similar to, like, the MCU, right? The way that they connect movies and TV shows and have one character move from one to the other. And seeing Yendor in these multiple novels over the last couple of weeks that I've been reading, I'm just like, oh my gosh, he's just in everything. Like, when do I get a Yendor feature?
And it makes sense, And I think it's why I think it's pretty easy, even during the strike, to keep talking about Star Wars, because there is not only is all of this novels and comic books and stuff out there and video games, but it's so clearly being brought back into some of the other stuff that we're not going to talk about for a while, but hopefully, I am very hopeful that the strike is ended by the time any new Star Wars properties come down the line. And I no new stuff is being made right now, and it shouldn't be. But whenever they do, I know there've been a couple of times where, one time in specific, that was kind of a problem, where elements of the book were put on screen and were changed in ways that removed a character that's really important to a lot of people because of representation matters. I don't want to really get into it because I'm trying to talk about the shows and everything like that. But, so I hope things are better that way. I think there have been a couple other instances where book details weren't always kept the same. But I think certainly that we are having this level of interaction between the books and the movies and TV shows that I really, really appreciate. Because it makes you feel like, I think sometimes when watching the MCU TV shows, especially like in the Netflix MCU shows, but even some of the more recent stuff, when that stuff then wouldn't happen in the movies, or like S.H.I.E.L.D. maybe is a better example, when it wouldn't matter in the movies, you kind of felt like, why am I watching this? Like, it's good, but it's its own, it's kind of like the redhead stepchild. I say that as a redhead who is a stepchild. And so, yeah, so I'm just finding I like the books so much, and there's so many rich stories, and it tells us more about the story, tells us more about the characters, and it just tells us so much more about the world.
Yeah, and we have so much opportunity for more. Like I said, give us a Yendor novel or whatever. Mm-hmm. Give us a Casterfo novel, like with him as the main character. Like, show us what he does in the Resistance after he's rescued here. Yeah,
especially since we don't know why he doesn't show up. Maybe give him a glorious ending, but have him be, because they're not done yet. They've only recruited a few people. Have him be part of the next group, that he goes back to some of his colleagues on his side of the New Republic and helps rally them against the First Order. I think that could be great.
Right, because he was part of what were the political parties called? Populists and Centrists? Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
So he was a centrist, right? Who was kind of like more...
No, Leia was... Because the it's kind of like Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Okay. Leia was let's have a central government that has some authority over everything, and he was more on the every planet should get to do its own thing, and I have very, very loose kind of connections to each other.
Is that what it was? I thought he was like more pro authoritarianism.
No, maybe you're right. Maybe he was on the... he was nothing pro-authoritarianism, but I thought it started from a place of, like, let each planet do its own thing. But you may be right. Well, fans, let us know in the comments. He definitely was on the side of more authoritarianism. And it's just the way their relationship was played out has been really great. So I'm going to end with just one little sad note about the book. Not a sad note, but like a little you didn't need to do that. And again, this is spoilers for the adventure parts. We spoiled the whole book, but, I hope you've not cared about that to this point. But if you do, this is definitely a spoiler about an adventure part. But that's the point, is that the book itself is already spoiled. Obviously towards the end of a book, you're going to have some characters in lethal danger and some real moments of do they live or do they not. And some of it is with new characters who we don't see on screen, so it totally makes sense. But one of them is Wedge Antilles. The book tries to get you to wonder if Wedge Antilles is going to live through a battle, when we know he appears in the next movie.
Oh, that's where you're going.
I was just like, come on. Like,
I was going to say,
I get this a prequel problem and plot armor problem, but yeah, he had so many other characters to choose from.
I would never assume that Wedge was going to die under any circumstances, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, but he is like as close to a main character as you can get, from the side characters. So I thought you were going to go to, my new favorite character, Yendor. His daughter dies in their escape from Ryloth, and it was really tragic.
Yeah, and he comes close to sacrificing himself.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that he would help them escape if he does, but also in part he's doing it because, he wants to die now that his daughter is dead. And there's a really kind of touching scene where he learns that his grandchildren are still alive, his son's children.
Yeah.
But then Leia specifically kind of like she gives him something to do, which I think helped. Like they realize that one of the pilots has died, and so they need someone to fly an X-wing.
Yes.
And that's really what it is, a really beautiful moment because it's not
he's this guy. I don't know. He's my new Wedge. Like the connection between them. Wedge. Maybe I think are we gonna have an episode on Glup Shidos?
Yeah. Okay. We definitely could.
So Wedge is one of my favorite, kind of started as a Glup Shido and has become just a real character and a real person. Mm-hmm. So I hope that's on the books for Yendor.
Yeah.
Coming up.
I would love to see that. All right. Well, quick programming note, and then we'll take this away. But then, of course, we're going to have the Patreon section. Just letting folks know that I'm going to Gen Con next week. And I think I'm going to have Star Wars content that I get a chance to record before that. I think what we're actually going to do is I've been on a non-American movie kick. And I recently, Paul, who's a frequent guest on this podcast as well, recently watched The Hidden Fortress, which is a Japanese movie from the 50s that Lucas said many times was a big inspiration for these movies. So we're going to talk about that. It's a movie that wasn't made by any of the companies that are being struck. I've been kind of getting into a lot of those movies. I have a lot of Godzilla thoughts that I want to talk about. So we'll get more into that as well. But letting you know, I hope that's going to happen. But in case it doesn't, because I'm going to be away, there may not be an episode next week. Again, please be understanding. With a strike, it's a little harder to find regular Star Wars content than to find regular guests. But we're going to do the best we can and do what we can to support the strike. Because I think in the end, that's what's more important. So, Riki, though, for people who want us to find and support your work, where can they do so?
Well, you can find me on Twitch or Twitter or X, I guess it's called now, at Rikipedia Go, RIKIPEDIAGO, and primarily on Twitch I stream Pokemon Go GBL, Go Battle League battles. Yeah. And I am looking into getting on Blue Sky, I believe. I got an invite code, so might try to grab my handle there, because the ship is finally sinking.
Yeah. Well, if you can send one my way, with the rat scurrying in all directions off of Twitter, I didn't want to create, I created one on one of the sites, and then someone else wanted me to do threads, and someone else was talking to me about Blue Sky. I'm going to kind of wait a little bit, but I think if you can get me a Blue Sky invite, I'll happily take it. Or someone else wants to send one in. If you're a listener and having a spare one, send one in, and I can try to dedicate myself there. Of course, though, in the meantime, you can find all the stuff for this podcast and all my podcasts on theethicalpanda.com. The episode that I'm recording with Paul is when we're going to start getting to that feedback that I keep promising. It's just been a really rough couple of weeks here. I had my car totaled, or pipes were it's been an adventure the last couple of months. But we're finally going to get to that feedback and then again make it more regular. And of course, the best way you can support this podcast is go to our Patreon. For only a couple of bucks a month, I have no idea what the price of a fancy coffee drink is, but I think it's about the price of a fancy coffee drink, especially if you get a large. You get ad-free content, you get bonus content, and during the strike, 20% of everything I make from Patreon will be donated directly to the actors and writers and I think it's called the Entertainers Fund, but it's being used not just to support the actors and writers, the people in the unions that are on strike, but also to support people in the other professions that are not striking but aren't working. The people in craft services, the people in who do lighting for the movies, like all of the technical staff and all the production staff and the everything from makeup to catering to security, who when there's no TV being shot, they don't have jobs. So it's a really great fund. If you can donate yourself, that's fantastic. I'll post a link in the show notes. But of course, if you want to give to the Patreon, helps support us, helps keep us going. And that's really awesome. So on behalf of myself and Riki, thank you so much for listening. We have spoken. So for the patrons, this is just going to be kind of a sneak peek. We'll do a full episode on it. But I want to just give you a chance to talk about it right now. Riki, for those who have no idea, what is a Glubshido?
Glubshido is a made-up Star Wars character name. Completely made up. And I think for the full episode, we'll have the actual quote. But to paraphrase, someone at one point on some social media said that Star Wars fans just really love when they see their Glubshido on screen and get really excited about minor characters. Mm-hmm. So when we do the full episode, we'll definitely I will try to dig up the original quote of that. But it has come to embody just the background character in Star Wars, that you do the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at your TV screen thing when you see them in a TV show, or the character shows up in a novel, you're oh yes, you're really excited. And then we're talking super obscure minor characters. And the funny thing is I've been talking with Sarah a lot about baseball, and there's a made up name in baseball too, which is really funny. A made up old timey pitcher named Tungsten Arm O'Doyle. And this happened in reference to Shohei Ohtani, who I finally got to see this past weekend, because he is doing fairly unprecedented things as both a pitcher and a hitter in baseball. The records he's setting and the numbers he's putting up. Someone made this tweet about Shohei Ohtani is doing things that have not been seen since the days of Tungsten Arm O'Doyle. And it's just it's a made up name, but it's really funny because some Japanese journalists came to one of their American journalist friends, and they're I can't find any stats on this Tungsten Arm O'Doyle. And he's oh my gosh, no. He's really embarrassed. Had to explain this joke. Yeah. And that's what Glubshido is everyone, I think all Star Wars fans now, well, not all, but a lot of Star Wars fans now know this name, and they talk about it as if it were a real character. And someday they will probably make a character and name it this, and we'll all be well, jump the shark.
Yep. And I will say that now a lot of the term Glubshido it started very much in the Star Wars world, it has now gone far beyond
Oh, has it?
Oh yeah, like
that's even more exciting.
There is. I'm trying to think what I can say without promoting. This isn't promoting a movie, so I'm fine. I think making the statement is not promoting a movie. Y'all know where I stand, etc. But for example, people are talking about which Barbie is their glub shido, and people talk about like,
That's amazing.
Like when some like little background character, in one of the Star Trek TV shows shows up, then they'll be like, oh, he's the glub shido. There was, I mean, it just is kind of everywhere now. And so I really love that that's out there. I recently sent you a picture because it was in part inspired by some conversations with Riki that I decided to start watching the Godzilla movies. First, I watched Godzilla 1954, which I'm not going to say anything about whether or not to go see a movie in the theaters that's about the American perspective on the nuclear bomb. But I expected a guy in a rubber suit destroying cities and making a few comments about nuclear weapons. It's a very powerful exploration of when can you or can't you use weapons of mass destruction and what do they mean from a Japanese perspective only 9 years after the war. There is a guy in a rubber suit who smashes toy buildings, and it's kind of fun to watch, but really it's just an amazing movie. And then later, my partner and I got really into it, so then we started watching some of the later movies, which are much more just the guy in the rubber suit smashing buildings. They're a lot of fun. Some of the special effects are utterly nutso, but we haven't yet watched it, but apparently in some of the movies, Godzilla has a son. Yeah. And I just saw one picture. Minina, yeah, thank you. And I just saw a picture for one of those movies. I've not seen the movie yet. I just sent that picture to Riki. I'll include the picture in the show notes. I already know he is my Godzilla glub shido. Because it's just the most cute, ridiculous little monster creature. And, Godzilla's standing next to him like a concerned, proud parent. And I love him. And he can do no wrong in my eyes. He will be wonderful. And I can't wait to see him.
Yeah, is Minira a glub shido? I don't know. It's hard to say. In the context of Star Wars, I think Minira is much closer to like what Wedge is now in terms of like fandom and knowledge and stuff.
Right.
But it's a very different franchise, and there's only 20 or 30 kaiju in the entire franchise, so like a dedicated fan can know all of them.
Right, that's definitely true. I think you bring up kind of an interesting point, is that you can love to see your glub shido show up more, but the more they show up, eventually they stop being a glub shido.
Yeah, exactly.
Wedge is a good example.
We'll probably talk about that.
Yeah.
So for me personally, like, I will spoil that my, like, just name wise, my favorite is from, which one is that? Attack of the Clones. It's the, hey, you want to buy some death sticks guy that Obi-Wan like brain wipes and makes him go reassess his life. That character has a name. His name is Elon Sleazebagano. Yeah, and that's just like, just put him in the background of some scene in the future, and I'll lose my mind. The moment that I found out, I don't even know why I found out, but I found out that was this character's name. I was like, that's it. I'm committed to the bit.
Yeah, I'm with you in part because the name goes the opposite direction, but even before I knew the name, my Star Wars glub shido is the diner owner, Dexter,
yes.
the six-armed alien who Kenobi goes to talk to in Attack of the Clones. And
Dex.
He shows up and has actually we get the origin story of him and Kenobi's friendship in the Kenobi novel, which just made me so happy.
Yes.
Like, he's not a huge character, but he's an important character. And it's like, this guy shows up for one scene in one movie out of 9, and some novelist decided they needed to explain how he and Kenobi became friends, and how he came back and decided to open up a diner, but also knew all these things about out there in space. So yeah, he's my glub shido. I love it.
That's a good one, because that diner they didn't even try to change it. It's just like a 1950s diner. It's like, why does this exist in Star Wars?
In Ireland, there's a lot. We're way off topic here, but I'll just say this, and then we can move. We can probably wrap up. In Ireland, there's a chain of restaurants called Johnny Rockets.
Okay.
Johnny Rockets is an Irish attempt to make an American 1950s diner, and so it's a lot of the same food. There's pictures of Elvis and James Dean and Aretha Franklin, and all these kind of people. And, it's fine food. It's like overpriced hamburgers and stuff like that. It's a fun environment. Pretty good French fries, if I remember. Then I believe in China, in like Shanghai, like one of the big cities that gets a huge amount of international tourism. I'm not sure exactly where, but there's apparently this like plaza that has a restaurant from all over the world. Like every country, they went to every country and found a restaurant to represent that country and brought it back to this plaza of restaurants.
Oh.
The one for Ireland is Johnny Rockets.
Oh no. Oh no.
And when the Irish, this was like back in the 90s when I was there for college. I'm hoping it's been fixed by now, but people were so angry about it at the time. So, but yeah, the point being, I think the American diner is such a thing that I think they might have it 3,000 years in the future. And maybe we had maybe Dexter invented it in that galaxy far, far away, time long ago. And just somehow the news came to America and New Jersey and they started opening diners. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, future full length episode. Yeah, we're going for it.
That'll be fun.
What is a glupshido? Like I have theories on like why it is so much more prevalent in Star Wars than in other franchises that I would love to talk about. And then everyone write in with your favorite glupshido, or do you think, answering questions about like, is Wedge a glupshido, or did he start as one and evolve? And same question I have for Boba Fett. Like, look at Boba Fett's origins. I don't believe like any character said his name in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, he was 100% a glupshido.
Yeah.
And then so was who's the hunter who Ming-Na Wen played?
Fennec Shand.
Fennec Shand, yeah, she was a glupshido. So, yeah.
We'll talk about all of this.
So much out there. All right. Well, Riki, as always, thank you so much to our patrons. You're what makes this all possible. Thank you so much. Have a great day.